Good evening. Welcome to Keck Theater, and I'm Melanie Sill. I'm the Vice President of Content at KPCC, Southern California Public Radio. I want to welcome you on behalf of all my colleagues at KPCC and our partners, the Milken Institute. I want to thank our host, Occidental College, and all the wonderful students who also helped unload our stuff tonight. Before we get going, I'd like to know how many people here have ever been to a live event for KPCC? Great. And how many people are KPCC members? Even better. How many of you are carrying student debt? Thank you. If you are part of KPCC's audience, you probably know that, especially in the past few months and over the past year, we've been doing more and more reporting on a variety of issues related to affordability. We've covered a lot about housing, the high costs of rent, and many interrelated issues that make up part of the squeeze on the middle class we're all familiar with, especially in a place like Los Angeles. Tonight's event on student debt is the second installment of a series called Rescuing the California Dream, Policies for an Affordable Future. The series we're co-presenting with the Milken Institute. And one of the things we're trying to do with our coverage at KPCC is not just report on problems, but also understand how these issues are playing out in people's lives and the lives of our communities, and look for ways that things can be done about them and that we can be active as citizens in addressing these. Our next installment is coming up November 10th at the Milken Institute in Santa Monica. We'll have KPCC reporter Ben Bergman, the Milken Institute's Kevin Clouden, and some special guests, and we'll be looking at the workforce and the effects of changes in the workforce on businesses and the market here in Southern California. Before we get going, a couple of details. We're live video streaming, as you can see, so please do silence your mobile devices, but also use them to tweet. The Twitter handles and hashtags should be on the screen above me, and we're using Affordable CA as the main one. Thank you for coming out tonight, and I hope that you'll find this rewarding and that you'll participate actively. I'd like to introduce now the Senior Associate for the Milken Institute and the California Center, Matt Horton. Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for coming. I echo Melanie's thanks. We're all glad that you can make it out on a busy night. We at the Milken Institute are grateful for KPCC's president, Bill Davis, to the entire production team, John, Melanie, Liz, Janice, for being outstanding partners throughout this series that Melanie just described. This is the second of three forums on the most important affordability issues affecting Californians. You may know that the Milken Institute is a nonpartisan, nonprofit economic policy think tank. In the California Center, we help leaders address issues concerning policy development related to the state's economy and long-term economic viability. Our series of discussions on affordability addresses the fact that thousands of Californians face the possibility of being priced out of their communities. We're exploring the rising costs of education and housing and the dwindling opportunities for many to reach and remain within the middle class. We plan to use this series and the resulting policy recommendations as a platform to engage in some direct policy leadership in Sacramento in 2016 and beyond. And with that, thanks again for joining us, and let's welcome our moderator for today's event, KPCC education reporter, Adolfo Guzman Lopez. Take it away.
Welcome. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. My name is Adolfo Guzman Lopez, and just before I bring out the panelists, I would like to say what a treat it is for me to see face-to-face the people who listen not only to my reports, but all the programming at KPCC. And I think I speak to everybody who's involved in the production at KPCC. You know, we work really hard to put reports, talk shows, you know, all of this programming that we're very passionate about. But when we meet people either on the field or face-to-face who actually listen to it and are informed, enlightened, entertained, affected by it, it's really a treat for us. So really thank you for showing up. and engaging in this very important topic. That's one of the mission statements of KPCC, is to bring together the disparate communities of Southern California, because we know it's a challenge to come together. And you've done so today. And by the end of tonight, I think we're going to learn some new things. We're going to hear about each other's experience on this very important issue. So let me bring out the people who are have expertise on this issue of the indentured class, student indebtedness, and in many different ways. Debbie Cochrane, come out, Debbie. She's the research director of the Institute for College Access and Success. That's a Bay Area-based group that advocates on the issue, really to inform the public about how rising student debt affects families, the economy, and society. There's very important work going on at the Institute. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. And I'm going to bring out Devon Graves. Devon, come on out. Now, Devon, when he was at Cal Poly Pomona, was very active with the California State Student Association, advocating for students on the impact of tuition increases. He's also a student member of the California Student Aid Commission, a group that makes some important decisions on this issue of student indebtedness and how students pay for college. Thanks a lot, Devon. Really appreciate it. And Maureen McRae Goldberg, she's the executive director of financial aid at Occidental College. I had a great conversation with her a couple of weeks ago, and I got a sense of what not only she but her team do to put together these packages to help students put together their college dream in many different ways, not only through loans, scholarship, grants, and other things. And people like Maureen exist at every higher ed institution, and they do very important work. Thanks, Maureen, for joining us. And Perry Wong, come on out, Perry. Yeah, he's the managing director, research for Asia, California, China, energy, human capital, regional economics. And if that wasn't enough, for technology too, at the Milken Institute. Thanks, Perry, for joining us. We're going to be talking about many different things today related to student indebtedness. And I was thinking about how to approach this. And I think, just like a news story, what are the facts, right? What do we know about student indebtedness? And Debbie, let's just briefly talk about, how many students are graduating from college in debt? How much are they in debt? How are they getting in debt?
Great. Can folks hear me?
All right, they'll adjust it, but yeah, go ahead and talk.
The best available data on student loan debt for students to compare across colleges, states, is for bachelor's degree graduates. And that's a useful point to look at because it's a similar point in time student to student. So when we look at bachelor's degree graduates who left school in 2013, they have just shy of $30,000 in student loan debt. That's for students from public and nonprofit colleges, your UCs, your Occidentals. Many students also graduate from for-profit colleges. They tend to have about 40% more in student loan debt. Unfortunately, we don't have very good data on them college to college.
So now, how's this been growing over the years? How's student indebtedness been growing?
It's been growing, I would say, over the past decade at a much faster clip than inflation. Somewhat different patterns for public colleges and nonprofit colleges due to the recession. But we tend to see much larger increases in the average debt that graduates have, some smaller increases as well in the share of students with debt.
Maureen, what have you seen? You've been involved in financial aid a couple of decades.
Yeah.
And so what have you seen in that time of how students put together how they're going to pay for college?
Well, I think at a private institution, if your parents can't write the check for the entire amount, then you are looking to take out student loans. There's an expectation that you will do it.
Give me the list of student loans. What kind are there?
Well, you have your federal loans. You have the federal Perkins loan, which may end tomorrow. We don't
Really?
know. We're still hoping. We have the federal direct loans, which used to be the old Stafford loans, which used to be the old guaranteed student loans, for reference.
And if you know the interest rates on any of these, can you tell me?
Well, the Perkins is 5%, and the direct is 4.76, I think. And they come in the unsubsidized and subsidized variety. A subsidy being the government pays the interest while you're in school or on a approved deferment status. And unsubsidized, the interest capitalizes onto the principal balance if you don't pay it. Then you also have institutional loans. The colleges could have their own loan programs. We have, for example, like many Southern California selective schools have the Weingart loan program, which is a zero interest loan, which is pretty neat. But colleges also have their own loan programs that vary in interest rates. Then you move into alternative loan sources, which dried up a lot after 2008. They're harder and harder to get. I actually think that's a good thing. They were probably a little too loose to get before, because it kind of controls that a little bit. And then you move on to parent loans.
Yeah, I talked to a couple of people in the course of putting the research together on this, whose parents had $80,000 for a couple of kids, $80,000 in Parent Plus loans. What have you seen with parents getting into debt, taking out loans?
Well, I'm actually happy to say that we're seeing less and less parent borrowing, even though our low-income and middle-income families are staying steady at the college. I think that's a sign of an improving economy, which is good. But you do have families that will come in and sit down with me or one of my staff and say, it doesn't matter how much I borrow, this is where my kid is going. And there's a real shock, I think, that the parent is going to indebt themselves. They're retired. We actually can see what their retirement is. We can see what their jobs are, and there should not be this level of borrowing. Yeah. And yet they borrow because they want to fulfill the dream of their kid.
Now, Perry Wong has brought some slides that illustrate some of these issues. I think with whoever's in charge of AV, if you can put the first one up, and I think it'll illustrate some of what we're talking about. In the green room, Perry, we were talking about, the cost of education, right? Why is it that higher education, a college degree costs so much, right? And the costs have been rising. I mean, many of us remember that 7 or 8 years ago, UC and Cal State was going through these incredible tuition increases, because the state was giving less money to the Cal States and the UCs. How do we approach that issue of how much a college costs?
Yeah, I try to figure that out, because I think when we all go out to subscribe to service, you buy a car, buy a house, at least you know where the major component of costs. Education, unfortunately, is very difficult to trace back. We know that the amenity, the facility, all those new buildings needs money, and professors usually command higher pay. After all, higher education is about human capital. So if they are good, if they can teach us kids new stuff, I think it's part of the computation. But I think fundamentally the issue is how one can look at the increments over the past 20 years. If you look at the charts, over 800% since 1990. And the next category is healthcare. So they are not even on the same horizon if you look at the scale. That, I think, we need to answer to, although the answer is difficult to seek.
So now one of your areas of expertise is looking at the regional economy and measuring how indebtedness impacts our neighborhoods, the ability of recent graduates to purchase a home, to get married, to really enter that next stage in their lives. How do you start looking at that, and what are the social costs of this indebtedness on the Southern California communities?
I think initially when you look at that, you look at those all numbers, the cost to the family. I mean, very straightforward. I think Maureen talked about the family coming in to look at the financial aid and loans. But then if you aggregate all this into society, then quickly you realize if there's a class of people, young people, that at the first day of their professional life, they already are indebted. Could be 20, could be 30, and if they had advanced degree, I assume they can even accumulate a lot bigger. Could be 120, could be 200s. The high expiration they have, probably they accumulate more debts. That's an unfortunate fact. So looking down the trench then, knowingly that they have to repay their loan, and that would impact them when they want to apply for a loan for housing, buy a home, have a family. Now, very quickly down the road, then they look at the cost to live in, particularly in California, in San Francisco or LA, then quickly they realize they cannot save much money. Now, that's where the social cost comes in. That when those people at the midpoint of their career, probably getting to the 30s, then they realize if I want to raise a family, I have my mortgages, I have my car loans, and student loans for the young couple. Then they would try to find a location. There are plentiful actually in the United States that you can find a good pay with lower cost. Then that's where it costs us, costs the state and every taxpayer that we put into the state coffer to groom our young, supposedly to help us when we get old, but those are not going to be there. They will move to other location, and that's where the social cost is.
Devon, you're now doing your master's at UCLA in higher education. Tell me about your class, your friends from Cal Poly Pomona, the ones who are in debt. Tell me about their ability to kind of move on or not, how much debt they have. How much debt do you have?
Well, I have $17,000 in debt from my undergraduate,
which is lower than not only the national average but the statewide average.
Exactly, and so there are ways, and I've received support and scholarships and other things. But the conversation that students are having are conversations that probably many people in this audience or students in this audience are having themselves. The conversation is, is this investment really worth it, and what is it going to look like after I walk across that stage? And what is the job market going to be like? Am I really going to be able to pay back these loans? Students are aware of the responsibility that they have, but it is concerning when you have the economy to worry about. It's concerning when you have to navigate the job market. So there are ongoing conversations and concerns that students do have.
So you're not in the job market yet, but what about for you? I mean, you're still in school. Was that Cal Poly Pomona degree worth the debt that you're in now?
Every moment. I enjoyed my time in the CSU and at Cal Poly Pomona, and from my experience in Cal Poly Pomona, that's why I'm pursuing a master's in higher education, because being able to be a part of these conversations, it's important to understand the theories and the history behind this, so that the students of this generation who are taking on this debt, when we become the leaders, we can make the change and we can be effective, because we're going through a very rough patch in our history.
Debbie, indentured servitude, is this term from centuries ago. You owed money to somebody and you basically became their slave, right? So students graduating from college owing all of this money, are they an indentured class?
It's certainly a charged term. Sometimes maybe helpful to get attention to the issues. I think it's very important, though, that we acknowledge that there's different kinds of debt. To Devon's point, a Cal Poly degree is going to pay off for the vast majority of students that are going there and graduating. Students at Occidental, for instance, they typically graduate with about $21,000 in federal loan debt, but 86% of the students who go here graduate. And new federal data shows that 95% of them are able to pay down their loans or start paying down their loans pretty quickly. Compare that to another four-year college in LA, Westwood College, a for-profit college, where far more students are graduating with debt, with $38,000 in debt, but only 27% of the students there graduate, and then only 37% of those students are able to pay down the debt. So there's a huge divide. There's the students who are going to really good programs at really good schools, they're graduating, they're able to pay down their debt. And then there's everyone else. There's the students who are going to schools that maybe aren't worth the cost, or students that are going to any type of school and just not able to graduate.
What is the most serious thing happening in this issue of student indebtedness? Is it as you were saying, on the issue of for-profit colleges which have low completion rates and actually, have been fined, some of them, for fraudulently stating some of the placement rates? Is that the issue? Is it very high interest rates on some of the loans? What are the most serious issues?
So probably the two most serious issues. One of them I would say would be for-profit colleges. For-profit colleges have students who are much more likely to borrow. They end up graduating with much more debt for their degree, and then they're more likely to default when they leave school. New default rate data actually came out this morning, and it showed that of all the students who entered repayment in 2012 and defaulted by 2014, in California, 63% of those defaulters had attended for-profit colleges. 63% of those defaulters attended for-profit colleges. So that's a huge problem. And then I would say the other issue with rising student debt is state disinvestment, that over time, states have been pulling back their portion of support for public institutions and pushing more of the costs onto students and families, and that contributes to rising debt.
Perry, the conversation you and I had previously was about the region, about Southern California. What do you think the policymakers here could be doing to make things better for these students who are coming from other states, maybe students with debt coming from other states, settling here? What could policymakers do in Southern California?
I think to start, let's keep the state's funding to this school at the level even keel compared to others. I think we have a charts.
Okay. Let's move on to the next chart.
On the state's investment in college. Now that's a aggregate, so it's not just tuitions, but the campus and everything. So I think being an economy, driving technology advancements and all those fancy ideas and innovations, I think we ought to be able to think about the birthplace of all the ideas, which is college and institutions, educational institutions. So we need to keep that. I think second was, there are some things been going on already, attracting some foreign students, and they truly are high-paid students. They don't care very much about the level of tuition they pay, as long as they can enroll into fine institutions such as Berkeley, UCLA, they are happy. I think if they can come up with a model to use the high end to subsidize the low end, the households in the state that actually have difficulty meeting that tuition level, I think that would be another solution. The fact that I think the room is very tiny, if you look at the number, if you look at the charts, you look at some of the top states in New Jersey, New York, you're talking about $80,000 per head on students. So that's a huge number. Fundamentally, the state has to come up with a way to look at education. That's from the front end. And on the back end, I think we need to keep the economy growing at the rate that can sustain or actually keep the talent we promote. That's for the long run. And it may seem unrelated, but then if we cannot keep the educated, the experienced one down the line 20, 30 years, we lose them, and then you have to do it from scratch. So it's a virtuous cycle.
Tell me, there's a personal anecdote. There was somebody who was interning in your office who had to move out. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that actually is a sad story, actually. We hired this young lady, Californian, typical California lady, very gung-ho on works, hard worker, learn quick, very open to ideas. I thought that we can keep her for a long while, but unfortunately, she got a very good offer from a competing state that would help pay off her tuition debt. Very easily by moving, driving, actually, I don't know, maybe a day drive. I think some of you may second guess what state is.
Oh, what state is this?
With the housing costs so low that there is no reason for her to reject. So the only thing I could say to her is maybe I would come visit you sometime.
So there's a brain drain that's going on. Right?
Yes, it is, because If you look at the pay scale and the cost factor, someone who makes 45,000, say in Bay Area, will be perceived to be making 30 something. That's the cost factor that you have to look into.
And let's move on. Keep going. There's
And
another
if you-
chart that
if
illustrates this.
Right, if you one have to have the student debts on one hand, and then you know that the cost of living is so high, then if you move to other states, you get almost equivalent pay. If you look at the charts over there in San Francisco.
So tell me
and
more about
LA.
this chart. I mean, I'm interpreting it, and I'm imagining I'm interpreting it correctly. So what median income feels like in different cities. So $30,000 median income in Los Angeles actually feels like what, 22,
Yeah,
23,000?
that's about right.
Why?
Well, housing is very expensive in LA and San Francisco. $1 million house in the Bay Area is a very ordinary house across the countries. But if you pay $1 million house in Texas, you got probably 4-bedroom and 3-car garage. That's what's amount to. So with that comparison, if someone with the student debt but get a very good pay offer, you pretty much can just switch and just bump yourself up by 30-40% pay.
But I don't want to move to Rochester, Dallas, or Houston.
Well,
like
if you get a
LA.
good job, it's not a bad place.
like
if you
LA.
can tolerate the snow and the wind in the winter.
Devon, tell me about the environment. You started at Cal Poly Pomona in 2011. Tell me about the environment there among students after, a couple of years of, I remember covering the Cal State trustees meetings where, there were loud protests and really, a lot of angry students, protesting that the trustees were raising the tuition. Tell me about the environment on that issue of tuition activism at Cal Poly Pomona.
Definitely. I came in after the 2008-2009 cuts, but those cuts really refocused students and families across the state that the cost was changing. And so in 2011, that was on students' minds. That was a conversation taking place amongst the university and higher education community. And then in 2012, when Prop 30 came out, a lot of students were excited about that because we really got behind the idea of keeping the cost low, not raising tuition, not having a trigger cut happen to higher education in California. So we got behind that and it spread the word to all the students because we wanted to make sure that that was something that people understood how important the investment into higher education is for our students.
Now, the other thing that I'm curious about with your situation is that you moved, while you were at Cal State, you were very active with the Student Association group, but then you started work with the California Student Aid Commission, which is kind of on the other side of the fence, other side of the wall. Did you feel like with the commission you were able to make a difference, or what difference were you able to make on the issue of students' ability to pay and student indebtedness?
Definitely. My service on the commission is so important because it's important to have students in the conversation about financial aid. The Student Aid Commission oversees financial aid in the state, Cal Grant, DREAM Act, Middle Class Scholarship. And so as a student representative on the commission, I'm able to share my story, the stories of other students, and why it's important that we make California higher education more affordable and accessible to our students. And that's what the goal is of the commission. So being able to see it from an activist side with my role in the Student Association, and then now being administrator of financial aid, I get to see both sides of that conversation.
All right. So at KPCC, we have something that's called the Public Insight Network. It's basically a list of listeners who have volunteered to be resources for KPCC. And I would actually encourage you to be part of that. We have some of those people here today, and I've talked to some of these people about their experience with student debt. Is Shane Bush here? Oh, okay. Shane, you remember talking to me, right? So we're going to get a mic to you. And I'm going to ask you, you don't mind talking about all the things that we talked about on the phone, do you?
Not at all. Oh, okay.
Okay.
You're holding it for me. Cool.
So Shane, you are $400,000 in debt? Is that
Yeah.
still?
Yeah. Still.
Okay.
And plussing,
Okay.
I think, over time. slowly.
Okay, but you've got a BA, you've got an
Got a
MFA from
BFA
Cal
I have a
Arts.
BFA and an MFA, yeah, from
Right.
Cal Arts, yeah.
Okay, and you've got some high ambitions. You're a musician. You want to start a production company, do some films, and we talked about some of these projects. They sound great. Now, day in, day out, how does that dollar amount weigh on you?
It weighs pretty heavy. I don't know how people do the house thing and stuff like that, like, dealing with house payments, but it feels something, I imagine, like that, like dealing with, a looming mortgage or something like that. I mean, I try not to let it bother me because I work and I create music and I create films and that sort of thing, so I just kind of, I do my best.
So tell me, how did it happen? How did you get into the $400,000?
Well, I took my first year at Berklee College of Music in Boston. So I started out at one school, I transferred, and the credits didn't fully transfer, so I ended up having to do a full 4 years at Cal Arts rather than like 3 years, So I ended up with about, I think, 200,000 I was at that point. I wasn't getting a whole deal of scholarship to help me with it, and I think at that point I had always wanted to get my master's. So at that point I thought it best to continue schooling rather than to start repaying and then maybe fall behind or something like that. And I thought it best to just continue. So I here I am, and but I feel I'm happy I got a master's. I'm happy I went to Cal Arts. I wouldn't have had it any other way because.
And it's made some connections for you that you feel are very important for what you want to do in the future.
Oh yeah, I mean, most of the projects I'm working on right now are through people from Cal Arts. So it's like I made connections. I met a lot of people. I learned a great deal. I made my thesis film on 16 millimeter. I didn't have to rent any cameras. So there are things that I got out of being there and being in that environment.
So what two things would you have done differently on the issue of, either the loans or debt or how you paid for your education?
I probably, I think I would have maybe worked another job, maybe tried to work more jobs during school. I worked pretty small part-time jobs and that sort of thing, and I think if I had done more work, maybe I could have. I just try to see it as, something that maybe I missed out on or something. Maybe I missed an opportunity in trying to do it, but in trying to pay for it. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe I would have gone to a state school or something like that had I really thought about the cost it would be on me later. But I'm really happy with the direction I went. Personally,
Great.
So
thanks so much for sharing
Yeah,
your
of
story. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much. Maureen, you and I talked about this, something that Shane brought up, which is very important. This issue of choosing the college that you're going to go to, and this conversation that you as an 11th grader, 12th grader are having not only with yourself, but with your parents and with other people about what your goals are in higher education. What do you see? I mean, obviously, you want everybody to choose Occidental College, but what do you see? How important is that 11th, 12th grade decision on choosing a college, and your parents or you being blindly focused on that, blue chip school as opposed to thinking about your goals?
Well, as a financial aid administrator rather than as an Occidental member of the admission and financial aid team, people really need to think about how they're going to make this investment in themselves. Underlying, it has been, since the Higher Education Act was first passed in the late 60s, the parents and families are responsible for paying for college to the extent that they are able. And financial aid is supposed to come in and fill in the difference. It hasn't done that in a very long time at the overwhelming majority of schools. So parents have been looking to borrowing, students have been looking to borrowing, and there isn't really a conversation going on, particularly in the 11th and 12th grades, or I like to say you need to really start this conversation when they start preschool, is how you are going to afford this. This is not a new conversation. For most people who are sending their kids to college right now, it was at the beginning of the steep increase in financial aid, in education costs. And yet what we're seeing in the aid offices is almost an ostrich phenomenon, that they come in during their senior year in high school, and there's this expectation that aid will cover everything. Or they'll get a full ride scholarship, which is kind of the urban myth of American higher education.
How common are full ride scholarships in general?
Debbie might know the actual statistics, but it's something like less than 1%.
So yeah, that's kind of out there as the brass ring, as the holy grail,
Right.
And it really drives people to make these decisions, right?
Well, and it's perpetrated in popular culture that they're out there. Just about any time a college is mentioned on television, whoever it is will say, "Oh, my kid's got a full ride to so and so," and those of us in the aid community are going, "I don't think so."
So Maureen, I was just told that actually Shane's mom is here, and what you're talking about, I think would be great. Can we get a microphone to Shane's mom? And I am going to put you on the spot because you're here, and you knew I was going to call on you. So could you tell me?
I didn't know I was going to be called on.
Okay. Could you tell me your name? And my question is very specific. What would you have done differently?
Well, my name's Inez Bush, and I actually work at a college. I work at Otis College of Art and Design now, which is interesting because had I been working there then, things might have gone a little differently because there are opportunities when you work at the college. But anyway, that was I was at the time. My husband and I had a marketing communications firm, and things were, when Shane was about to start school, things were healthy for us, and as far as financial, and then everything kind of turned over. So what would I have done differently had our financial situation been different at that time? The conversations with Shane would have been about choosing someplace else to go to school, looking at other options, and we kind of, when you're talking, all I'm thinking is that we've been riding a storm. That what we've been doing is kind of like we're in this boat riding this storm and trying to get to the next port. And so when he said that, he finished his bachelor's, and we weren't out of danger at that point with our own financial situation. And he talked about going on for his master's. I was the one saying, "Whoa, stop." My husband was like, "Well, you know what? Let him go for his master's because it'll hold off the loan situation, and we're in the process of coming back." But then we have not been able to recover.
How does his $400,000 debt weigh on you?
Every morning and night, every still moment, I think about it, and I'm very scared. And you can see it's emotional for me, and he's standing here saying that, and I feel like I let him down.
Why?
Because I didn't stop it when I was in hope. I didn't know where to go, and he was so determined to do, his creative outlet, and his work is. I'm his mother, of course, but his work is brilliant. The work he does is amazing. He takes risks. He talked about the 16 millimeter film. He used expired film. As a 16 millimeter expired film to create his film, looking at these risk factors, and that's the kind of person he is. He takes things on, and he just, he goes for it. And so I didn't want to squash that, and I don't know. I'm kind of getting lost in my words.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for sharing.
Sorry.
Really appreciate that. Debbie, you've been in Sacramento. You've talked to the policymakers, the elected officials about this issue. What persuades them? Is it trying to communicate these kinds of stories? And maybe I should back up and ask, is that what you're trying to do? Is you're trying to show them the human costs of the decisions they're making in Sacramento?
I definitely think there's a role of showing them the human cost, and sometimes the human face of a policy issue isn't what they think it is.
What do they think it is?
I think I think in some ways people will overstate some of the debt averages. For instance, we know that there are students with hundreds of thousands of dollars in loan debt. We also know that it's 99% of borrowers have much less than $100,000 in loan debt. So how do you solve the problem for the majority, but also put in safeguards for the minority or the extreme examples? I think that's a real issue. I think there's a real issue with information, and this is true at the state level and at the federal level. Back when your son was going to college, there was a lot less information, even if you wanted to look at the information on what college costs would really be for you in various situations or the debt levels. In some ways, we've had a huge shift on that front, particularly federally. There are now requirements that every college have what's called a net price calculator on their website, so anyone can go to any college's website, type in some basic information about their finances, and find out what their actual cost of going to college, not just the published price, but their actual cost after grant aid is accounted
And
for.
is this related to the new college scorecard that publishes that information and then publishes, what does it publish? The salaries of graduates, right?
Yes, exactly. So then there's also the scorecard. It has salary information, it has debt information for graduates, which is hugely important information. It's something we've been advocating for years, literally a decade, that information be more publicly available, because absolutely things like your cost of going to college, your actual cost, and the debt level that graduates typically incur by the point of earning a degree should be common information. They should be factors in choosing a college.
All right, thanks. We also have, do we have Dustin Davis here? Let's get a microphone. Now, Dustin, I haven't talked to you, so I, along with everybody else, will be learning your situation. So tell me, when did you graduate, where you graduated from, and how much debt you have, and how did you pay for your college education?
My most recent graduation was in 2011 from Chapman University. I received a Master's of Fine Arts in film and television producing. So I guess the lesson of the night is not to go to film school. No.
Oh, no.
Just kidding about that. It's great business. And so most of that, my undergrad, I had very minimal loans from my undergrad, which was great. But in getting my master's degree, that was going to pretty much be all on me.
So how much are you in debt for your undergrad and for your master's?
For my undergrad, it's less than $5,000. It's very, very small. Compared to my master's degree, now, after I've been paying on it since 2011, I'm down to, I think, about $82,000.
$82,000. What was it when you graduated?
It was just right over 100.
Okay. And so, same question to Shane. What would you have done differently, if anything?
I think I would have taken time in between undergrad and my master's. I went straight into my master's program to do some soul searching. And I mean, this might be kind of a out there answer, but to think, what are my values? What do I want to do? Because when I made that choice then, and then I moved out to California, and that was 6 years ago, I am such a different person.
Now, you say your choice whether you wanted to become a filmmaker?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I am such a different person, and I have grown in ways that I couldn't have even imagined. And so then you kind of start to get in this place where the career is not really matching with who you are, what your values are, but you feel so beholden to what you've invested.
You have to become a
yourself
filmmaker
in.
now.
Well, I work in TV production, so I'm in that field, and that's great, and I'm thankful for my job, very much so. But there's kind of this disparity between my values and my professional life.
Do you feel like you're an indentured servant like because of your loan debt?
That seems like a strong word, but I do feel this need to say, this is what I came out here to do, and so this is what I'm going to try to do. And because of that, I incurred this debt, and so it's my responsibility to stick with this and to try to pay it off.
So one more question. You know, we've been talking here about college choice. Do you feel you had enough information either before your BA or even before you enrolled in a master's program to choose a college, to know how much Chapman graduates were earning after graduation and that sort of thing?
That, you know, at the time, that was not part of my consideration process. I hate to say that now, but that was not part of my consideration. It was, what is the program like? What school am I going to even be able to get into? You know, what are the requirements for that, and where do I fit into that? And, you know, the Hollywood dream is you're going to make it big, and so none of that's going to be a factor anyway after your first big project.
Thanks so much for sharing your story. Really, really appreciate it, Dustin. So in a few moments, we're going to take the mic out to the audience, but I wanted to ask just a few more questions of the panel. Well, first of all, let me open up. Perry, what are your reactions from your expertise, from your point of view about what you're hearing?
Well, it started, both of them cannot go to Rochester. Too bad. Right. California is your best hope. I guess education is a very special service. And we have a trend at seeing this as being commoditized, meaning everything go bigger, higher tuitions, and fuller service. Whether it's for good or for bad, we don't know. But one thing we do know is that economic conditions change. Technology drive a lot of changes down the line. So even with the best intention to provide information to the young students to say, this is how much you need to pay to get a degree, and that's what you are going to expect to get. 4 years later, that might change. Definitely 10 years may not be the same. So I guess that's something that just have to bear in mind. And in today's global markets, 10 years ago, if someone asked someone to get a degree master degree in financial engineering, probably everyone would just load up that to go there, because once you get a degree, you go to New York, go to Hong Kong, go to London, you probably get a job that would pay you $600,000, $800,000. But today, good luck with the degree. So it just need to bear that in mind. And I think it goes back to one thing. I think I would like to say one thing my father told me when I came to this country to get my bachelor degree. He said to me, you can choose anything you want to study, but don't study philosophy, because you cannot even drive a cab. So that's my lesson.
And there, from what I understand, there's a comeback. Philosophy's making a comeback, right? Perry, I often this makes me think of what some of the Southern California boosters have been talking about as LA and Southern California as the creative capital of the world. Does this issue of student indebtedness affect kind of the drive of our economy, or is it just a little road bump along the way?
I think it will have a big impact on, I think, a very subgroup of what I call the creative class. If you look at the Southern California economy, people recognize the studios and all those. But those studios, they employ a lot of entrepreneurs or proprietors. And they are small. They may have 2 or 3 people. And however, those are the stronghold, what grab the big companies staying here. Because without those little guys, the company can move anywhere. So we have many, many of those in Southern California. Now, it's very unpleasant to listen to the story that these 2 young gentlemen accumulated huge debt. So that is a big burden, and then they don't know when they can pay that off, because they are not exactly getting on a salary job. They are getting on probably by contracts, and you don't know. You may hit it big, but you may not get it for a long while. So to that end, I think maybe we ought to think of some solution to help people with such high debts. which of course is not going to come free, but then someone should think of a solution to answer to that, because it's unique in Southern California.
Maureen and Debbie, when we were talking about this issue in the green room, there were some things, I'm not an expert on the issue, but there were some things that I didn't know about. For example, Maureen, you were talking about how a student applying to Occidental, if the parent owes college debt, that can be taken into consideration, and that, I feel like there are all these little details that people don't know about that are kind of out there to help them pay for college, right?
There are, but one of the problems that we have is the way we actually determine who gets financial aid. Low-income kids, particularly at selected schools at the UC, at the CSU, even at the community college, there's lots of money to cover their tuition. Not as much to cover their living expenses, but we have the Cal Grant in California, we have the Board of Governors fee waiver, we have SUG grants, those kinds of things. But the way we determine who gets the other money is based on need analysis, which is set with numbers originally pulled together in the 60s. And it hasn't really changed very much. And I think that if people go on the net price calculators that Debbie referenced, and see what they will actually have to spend on education, that it will surprise most of them. When I go out to high schools, I say, and after you pick your chin up off of the floor and see what it is you're expected to contribute towards education. So whereas I'm very much into access and low-income kids and getting those people into our colleges, I think we do a better job with them than we do with the middle class.
Yeah. So before we take questions, Debbie, what are the, 3, 4 most important things that have happened either on the federal level or state level to help students with a lot of debt in, the last several years?
I almost feel like I can boil it down to one, okay. Which was the creation of income-driven repayment plans. Since 2009, any borrower with federal student loans has been eligible to get into a plan that allows you to repay your debt based on what your income is and not just the amount of debt that you owe.
So give me an example, like what?
So basically it ensures that your loan payment will never be more than 10 or 15% of your income. And so if your income is very low, if you're
total
living,
income or disposable income?
It's assessed of your disposable, your discretionary income.
Okay.
And then of course that becomes a smaller and smaller share of your total income, the higher that your income is. But if your income is very low, 150% of the poverty line, you don't have to pay a cent. And you cannot pay a cent for 20 or 25 years and then get your balance forgiven. So no matter what your payments are, whether they're zero, whether they're $50, $100, as long as you're making your income-driven payments on time and steadily, your balance will be forgiven at the end.
So with your advocate hat on, what's the next step that needs to be taken?
Well, I would say, certainly those plans have been improved quite a bit over the years, so I think that's a really great step in the right direction. Maybe the next step would be to work on private loans. Certainly any borrower with a very large sum, anywhere near a six-figure sum for undergraduate study, clearly would have private student loans, which come with far fewer consumer protections than federal loans. There's no income-driven repayment plans for private loans, for instance. But there's a lot of problems with them. There's no bankruptcy protection for private student loans, so there's no way to get rid of that for those loans. Colleges are not currently required to even counsel students about the difference between federal and private loans, and that's a huge issue, whether students are taking out private loans unnecessarily.
To warn them against taking private loans with higher interest.
Well, at least to give them the information, right? I mean, we need to be able to give the right information to the students and help them receive the information. There's actually a bill on Governor Jerry Brown's desk right now that would require California colleges to counsel students in these situations. When they have untapped federal loan eligibility, tell them about that before they take out a private loan.
Free higher education? Free colleges and universities? Speechless.
Basically for as many places that are considering free college, there are that many different proposals for how to do it, and they vary. Some of them are really strong. The president's proposal, it's called America's College Promise, and
That's for 2-year community colleges, right?
exactly. And really, I think what the crux of that proposal is about maintaining state funding. There's a hook in there which says you got to make community college tuition free, but really it's about keeping states at the table so they don't keep pulling back on their share of the funding.
And as radical as we think this idea may be, there was a time in California when there was no tuition for the University of California or Cal State.
Exactly. And many students in California still don't pay tuition at a public college. The issue is that we've done such a poor job in California in some ways of supporting students' living costs, as Maureen mentioned, that often those are the biggest barriers, not to enrolling in college, not to paying a tuition bill. There's no tuition bill if tuition's free, but to paying for getting to class every week and for paying for their textbooks. In fact, if you look at the data on who has debt and who pays tuition, you can see that students who don't pay tuition because they're low income enough to get grant aid, the students who don't pay tuition are more likely to have student loan debt. So you can make an ethical argument, an argument that we should, as a matter of course, fund higher education to the level that it's tuition free for everyone, or that we'll get more people to go to college if it's tuition free, but that's not solving our debt problem. If you want to solve the debt problem, it's not about tuition, it's about looking at students' total costs.
Yeah, got it. All right, why don't you go ahead and raise your hand, and a microphone will come to you. So why don't you tell us your name and your question or comment briefly?
Real quick comment. My name is Michael Hopper. I'm a faculty at a local community college. I agree with Debbie. I like the topic in regards to indentured class, indentured servitude. Debbie mentioned the whole point in regards to for-profit colleges. Disproportionately African Americans and Latino American students have been going to those for-profit schools, so they come out with not graduating and huge debt and find themselves in an indentured kind of state. So I think it's very appropriate. I appreciate Mr. Graves in regards to the commission. They've taken the bold stance of defunding a lot of for-profit colleges in California that are really generating a lot of failure. Question to the panel, especially working in a higher education institution, have you heard any comments or thoughts or concerns in regards to the business community, regards to what more could be done on the community college, university level, even in some cases even kindergarten through 12th grade? Because in some cases where we have students who are graduating, but they're graduating into a workforce, as Mr. Wong said, there have been stagnant wages. And a lot of the employment that's been generated in the past few years after the recession, it's low income. Most of it's not making enough money where people can even pay their student loan every month. But a lot of, I just wondered if the panel heard anything in regards to with the business community as to what they're saying that they need from educators in California.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I've always really been interested in, and I think it's because I worked at a theological school at one point, was why the future employers aren't helping their educated workforce pay off their student loans. Why is it that if you're going to require a bachelor's degree or an associate's degree, that part of the benefits package isn't an ability to assist them paying off their student loans? It seems that the people that benefit the most from this capital are the employers. And yet what we're actually seeing is that the entire emphasis on the training of individuals is either put on the state or it's put on the students and families themselves. So I was recently looking at wages in California, and minimum wage, of course, is now 10, and it's about to be 11. But can you imagine living on $16 an hour and paying a $17,000 a year, a $17,000 loan debt? I mean, one of the biggest problems is that wages are so low, cost of education is so high. I mean, higher education is the thing that everybody wants, but nobody wants to pay for. You want an educated workforce. You want to be educated yourself. There are personal advantages to that. Faculty want to teach. The state wants the economic capital of that. But there doesn't seem to be anybody who really says, okay, I'm going to pay for that. It's always someone else's problem.
Yeah. Debbie, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, at TICAS, we manage a coalition called Californians for College Affordability, and we kind of, as a group, advocate for stronger need-based grant programs in the state. And of course, grant aid is important because when students get grant aid, it's that much more, not that much less that they have to borrow and have to repay. And so I would just add that we do have a few business groups that are in our coalition, which we have always been very excited about. I think they really see the value of looking at financial aid as an investment for students and for the future.
All right, let's get another question or comment.
Good evening. My name is Rabbi Jason Rosner. I wanted to draw your attention to professions that are not so often considered in the student debt question, public service professions. The cost of my seminary degree was $250,000. Many of my friends who are clergy in other religious denominations report similar things, and social workers, people who go into other forms of public service who will never make it big, have huge, huge crippling amounts of debt. So my question is, we have repayment plans which are in place after 10 if you're in public service, or 20 or 25 years, the debt is forgiven. Is there a debt forgiveness tax on what is wiped out by the federal government?
A debt forgiveness tax, is that what you're saying?
My understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that the balance of the loan that's forgiven is considered a type of taxable income by the government,
Yes,
and
that
you
is
are given,
correct.
assessed a tax.
The current rumor within the community is by the time any of the students in those programs actually get to the point where they will pay taxes on them, that we will have fixed the problem legislatively. that is, our legislatures work so well at the federal level. There is loan forgiveness, but currently under the income sensitive repayment programs, the amount that is forgiven at the end is taxable.
Wow.
I thought the public service PSLF forgiveness was specifically non-taxable.
Well, we can't hear you, by the way.
Yeah.
The public service part of it, I'm not sure of, but the income sensitive repayment, which being a theology student, you wouldn't be in the public service in that way. Mm-hmm. There is currently, unless something changes, you will face a huge tax burden. The same thing happens with real estate. If you get foreclosed on, you have this tax burden that follows you, even though the property may have gone underwater. No, right now, okay, my information may be just a little outdated on that. Oh,
Okay.
well, that's interesting,
Debbie,
because I
did you
did
have
pay
a
taxes on it.
question about this issue or something to clarify?
Yeah, I would just say I think there the problem is very real. I think the taxability of the discharges depends on the type of loan, because there's some specific types of discharges that are taxable and not. My understanding, and I might be mistaken, was that public service loan forgiveness specifically is taxable. Income-driven repayment plan forgiveness is I'm sorry, did I say that wrong? Public service loan forgiveness is not taxable. Income-driven repayment plan forgiveness is taxable currently, and it kind of can vary for other types of discharges. And I just want to underscore what I said before about how you can make $0 payments for 20 or 25 years and then get the balance forgiven. All of that interest is accruing that whole time. So the amount that's actually forgiven isn't just the balance that you took out; it's that entire amount. So it's a huge issue.
Okay.
And we're working to try to fix it.
Let's get another question or comment.
Hi, my name is Caroline, and I'm a proud 2007 graduate of Occidental College. Maureen actually helped me with my financial aid package every year, and that was what made it possible for me to go here. I went on to get a public administration master's degree from USC, and a bunch of my public policy interested nerd friends got together and talked about what policy recommendations we might be able to give to solve the student debt crisis. And we went through many different scenarios, but wanting to hear from the experts, have there been any discussions around what types of policy reforms we can expect in the future? Which of them have the most likelihood of getting any kind of traction? There's been a lot of talk about reforming how we calculate student interest, Why are banks able to borrow from the government at 0.5 interest rate, and students are basically the cash cows of the federal government? They are going to profit billions of dollars off of our student debt. Are there any policy sort of directions that we can be paying attention to that could cause some change in the student debt crisis?
And what did your group come up with? You said that your group...
You know, we just had a lot of ideas, but we all sort of decided we might not be the best experts on the actual structure of policies around student debt, but we definitely are experts in feeling the effects of it.
Right.
So we did talk about the calculating the cost of living as a part of repayment plans. We also talked about the possibility of calculating the monthly payments based on your gross income as opposed to your net income, because that is also a really big factor, especially in California when most of us are paying 50% of our monthly income for rent.
All right. I don't know, Devon, any reaction to that?
I would say the one thing, and this may not be the huge Band-Aid that we need to put over the problem, but financial literacy. The theme here and a part of this conversation is financial literacy is key. That's one thing that we can do. You can never know too much about the financial implications of attending a higher education. So as we think in California, we have students that know their A through G requirements to get into the UC, CSU, but do they really understand the financial burdens that come with that? Do they understand, are they getting the financial literacy? We're asking students, imagine this, they're seniors in high school, they're still asking permission to go to the restroom. And then we're asking them to sign a master promissory note for a loan that's a ridiculous amount of money. So we have to be educating our students, and it was said earlier that we have to go younger. There's been research from consumer bureaus that look at, we have to go young, even middle school, because we have a college-going environment. We have to make sure that financial literacy is at the conversation.
A couple of years ago, I did a story about a USC researcher who developed a card game that taught the various aspects of making a decision on which college, not only fit, but also thinking about financial aid, how to pay. So this is a card game that involved many different people, and then she developed an online game called Mission Admission, and then kind of like this, kind of monsters and spaceships kind of game that taught all of these things. So that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah. Now, I think we've addressed the issue that she's talked about, right? The policy proposals. Do you have anything to add on that?
I think there's a lot of things that are being discussed. I think the issue is that a lot of the things that are discussed are often not targeted towards the borrowers who are most struggling. I know one thing that there is increasing discussion about is the concept of risk sharing for colleges. That borrowers are taking on all this debt. They leave the school. In many cases, the school is the beneficiary of that debt. Right? They took most of the money through tuition. And then they kind of get off scot-free if the students are never able to repay. So there's this idea that maybe schools should really share in the risk. And if students are typically leaving the school unable to pay down their debt or ending up in default, then the school should face some penalties associated with that.
Let's get another question or comment.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Childress, and today is actually my third day at UNCF, United Negro College Fund. So I'm actually here as just a person. That's when I registered several weeks ago, but now I have a new lens to look at this. And so I want to kind of divert the conversation back to communities of color that the professor raised a little bit earlier. We've been talking a lot about choice, right, and education around financial obligations. And I think that that's important, of course, but I wonder, when you look at a lot of communities of color, the traditional kind of avenues for social capital and kind of network and kind of entree into the middle class and or power structure is not kind of there residing in the community. And so for some communities, college is not just about the credential that you receive, but about that social capital piece. And so when you talk about that, kind of the blue chip that we discussed, the higher, the more selective the college and so on and so forth, the better return on that piece of the investment. But then again, the cost becomes a challenge. And so I'm wondering if you have kind of thoughts or experience with how this is affecting communities of color and students of color, and then kind of attendant to that, Mr. Wong, I believe you mentioned that sometimes schools are, I just lost my train of thought. Sometimes schools are using kind of high-paying students to subsidize the cost of lower-income students, and I wonder how that drives both the economic and the education process. So when we're catering to the people who are bringing in the money, and that's one group, and the beneficiaries are another group, how does that influence the academic experience? It's a huge question, so take whatever pieces of it you're willing to.
Well, you know, it seems to me, okay, the reaction, what is your reaction to, you know, Black and Latino students, low-income students, and their level of indebtedness, right? Any comments?
Yeah, let me comment on that a little bit. I think the question you asked is very complicated, but let me address them kind of selectively. Maybe, hopefully, I could get to the end can answer your question wholly. I think education is a vehicle, a mobility for any individuals, regardless backgrounds, color, race. So I truly believe this is social good in many ways, shape, and forms. I still remember one of the leaders in the Institute commenting his experience in college days, how much it cost him to go to UC Berkeley, and today how much it would cost to go to the same institutions. So that's one thing I think we need to pause for the policymaker to think about the consequence of elevation so rapidly in cost of receiving education. And second, I think I also would like to comment on, I think may not be so popular but make a deadline, is that we ought to ask ourselves what we want to do. And is it a 4-year degree the absolute vehicle for anyone from any community to maximize his value or her value at that time? I question that. So is there a need to load up 4 years of debt to get a good job? That's, in essence, my question. I would find that 2 years could be a good vehicle to go for it. And then, if so be the case, maybe another 2 years. So that would somewhat bridge the cost, I think. And third, I never thought of using high income or people who are less sensitive to price to subsidize the low paying or the enable the group of students, because I don't think that's sustainable and I don't think that's a good idea. Since we can go back to draw the line on defining education, if we see it as a social goods, then that has to be a public policy to address the issue rather than subsidizing by income, because you're talking about mobility. So that, in essence, would be my answer to your question.
Okay. Maureen, your thoughts?
Well, I think the current model is that those that can pay do subsidize those that can't pay. If you're at a private school rather than at a public school, you're looking to have your tuition revenue cover the costs of the institution. A lot of private schools use something called a discount rate, which is for every student that comes in, how much dollars do you get back? So you have an average discount rate. And a lot of schools' average discount rate is between 40 and 50%. So some students pay nothing and actually get paid grant dollars for their living expenses because they come from a family that cannot provide. And then some people pay 100%. And if the financial model that you're looking at allows you to discount people, then somebody has to subsidize it if there's no public subsidy. So if you're a tuition-driven institution, which means you don't rely exclusively on your endowment, then that is exactly what you're doing.
Okay. Yeah,
You know,
go
I would
ahead.
just say, I think what that last point also is important about being a tuition-driven institution, and the fact that the cost of educating students at public institutions is far greater than the tuition charge that any student is charged. So at least at public institutions, it's not that some students are subsidizing others, it's that some are subsidized by the state more than others are subsidized by the state. So I think that might be a different way of looking at it.
Yeah. Devon, any reaction to her comment?
No, I think it's important to understand the communities of color and how they're affected by this, and we see the data. That's where the most neediest students are. So I think that's an ongoing conversation that needs to be had, and it's an important part that you brought up. And as the data as we continue to look at the data, what responsibilities do we have when it comes to looking at how we can better serve those communities?
And if we discourage somebody from a community of color from going to a Harvard, a Yale, and getting their degree there, are we doing them a disservice or shutting them out from? We are, aren't we?
Yeah, it's a disservice. It is truly a disservice. Just because based on someone's socioeconomic background, it should not defer them from the same opportunities as everyone else. We have to make sure that we are providing an equal playing field for students who can get the work done to achieve their education.
But even if we're discouraging them for their own good and trying to prevent them from getting into hundreds of thousands of dollars
in that
of debt.
case, yes. I just took the Harvard and I was like, oh no.
We need to back up for just a minute, because there are colleges that meet full demonstrated need, and all the ones you listed do. So Harvard, Yale. If you are a student of color or a student from a low socioeconomic background and you get admitted to these schools, you're going to do well from a financial aid perspective. The problem comes when you're admitted to schools that aren't able to meet that full demonstrated need, and they serve a greater number of low-income and ethnically diverse students. So it's not necessarily, Occidental, we meet full need. We do it with some loans and other things. There's a little subset of schools that still are able to do that. The problem that comes in is when you don't meet full need and they have to borrow from alternative sources in order to attend at all. And those that are deemed unacademically qualified to come to some of those more elite schools for whatever reason that may be, are in the colleges and universities that are most likely to put them into debt.
Okay. Last reaction, and we'll get some more questions in.
I think another piece on that is that, we're talking about debt in mostly the extremes today. But also debt is meant to be something that helps to facilitate access, and that someone can take out a student loan to pay for costs that they can't pay out of pocket right now, but they are comfortable financing and paying for it later. And I think, we've obviously kind of already covered the ground. Students who can get into the Harvards, whatever, they should probably go. They're probably not going to have that much debt when they leave. I think for communities of color and for first-generation students, their most likely option to go to college is a community college. It's in their community. It has a lower sticker price, at least intimidating in that way. And there we see almost an opposite problem of the extreme debt situation. We see colleges that are stopping offering federal loans, saying we just don't want anyone to borrow. We don't like debt. We don't want people borrowing. So we're going to pull out of the loan program. If someone wants to borrow, they can go to get a private loan. And we see that issue affecting disproportionately African American and Latino students.
And that's at for-profits.
This is community colleges.
Oh, community colleges.
Community
really?
colleges.
Wow. Let's get a couple more questions, comments.
My name is Bob Deutsch. I'm a cognitive anthropologist. That means simply I study people's experience of their own everyday life, particularly during the ups and downs of life. And I was recently asked by a company called Loan Gifting that works in the space you're talking about tonight to interview students with loans. And I've interviewed over the last 4 months about 150 students. And to me, it's just an extraordinary story beyond the facts of the matter, beyond the mechanics of the matter, which of course is greatly important. But just, it seems to be such an emotional drain on one's vitality and one's cognitive capacity to make decisions, to make plans, to learn, to have an approach towards the future that's positive. It has a huge emotional impact. I mean,
so we should be concerned about how those people, that impact and those people's ability to plant roots in a community, them leaving a community.
It's like your guests up front said, this gentleman, for example, he said, well, it weighs upon me, But my job when I interview is to find out what that actually means, that weighing, you know? And it really has an impact on your cognitive capabilities. It's fundamental. You know, people have said to me, for example, when I graduated college, I felt like I was birthed wearing a straitjacket. You know, it's a good image. I mean, it's appropriate image. Or they say, Bob, I used to see the future opening up before my eyes, and they make a gesture like this. And now I just see the future receding from me.
Well, thanks for that. I appreciate it. Let's get another comment question. Yeah.
Excuse me. Well, thank you. Good evening. My name is Amber Carter. I'm a financial planner that specializes in working with Gen X and Gen Y, specifically this aftermath of going to college. One of the things I've noticed is that a lot of clients incur debt not from undergraduate degrees, but actually graduate degrees. Specifically because they get their bachelor's, they go into the workforce, they figure out they need their master's because employers won't hire, or they're starting to bump up their game. Meaning the bachelor's is the high school degree now, and the master's degree is actually the bachelor's degree now. Right. So I'm wondering if is there any policy talk about perhaps diversifying state funds, not just to the graduate level, but also not just to the undergraduate level, but to the graduate level as well? Because I feel like that's where that big impact of debt really comes into play.
Student Aid Commission?
Well, I also did some work with the Department of Education and was able to look at data, and it's the data and what we see, and it differs from your personal experience, is that students who are going to graduate school, they're veteran, they're older, they understand the system, and so they're able to pay off their loan. So I haven't seen it like that, and I'm sure probably Debbie can speak more to the actual statistics out there, because graduate students usually have more of the experience to navigate that process, and in bachelor's of arts in undergraduate career is where the access is needed.
Yeah. Is there any movement to increase aid for the graduate level student?
Not that I've heard of. I think, really people still see, and the research still bears out, that the bachelor's degree is a fairly consistent and solid path to the middle class. So that's where all the policy concern really is.
And I don't have the statistics, but many master's and PhD students have access to deferment of tuition based on TA, if they become a TA and that sort of thing, right?
Adolfo,
yeah.
There's actually been a backup on investment in graduate education. Graduate student loans from the federal government are not subsidized.
Were they ever?
They were up until, Debbie, help me on this, maybe 2010?
So recently?
In the last few years.
In the last few years, yeah. Prior to that, they were subsidized, although they were also capped. Now the student loans that graduate students can take out can be the entire cost of education on a interest-bearing loan that is not subsidized by the government.
Okay.
So it worsens the problem.
Okay. Let's get another comment question.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to that a little bit. I'm a 2008 graduate of Harvard Law School, and I'm a public interest lawyer right now at a nonprofit. And I do think that earlier you all were talking about how you might not want to discourage people from certain backgrounds from going to these very expensive and prestigious schools. And I definitely agree you don't want to discourage people, but I do think that education is really important, even for people entering graduate school, really understanding what life is like as a public interest practitioner. And I think this speaks to the rabbi's point from earlier too. What the reality of that is like, because I think if I had a stronger understanding of what it would actually be like, only a tiny percentage of my class from law school practices public interest law. But if I had known, I think I probably would have made a lot of different choices. So I think it's really important to educate people across the spectrum, just what the realities are.
Would one of the choices have been to go to a different law school?
No, it probably would have been not to go to law school at all. That's actually a very, very common sentiment among my friends, including the ones who make a lot of money. But I do think, yes, if I had been able to go to law school and graduate with no debt, then that would have been a good option. And I did have that option. I didn't take it. And so, there are other things, but potentially not going to law school at all.
Thanks for sharing your experience. Another question or comment over here, and then let's take two more, and then, let's wrap it up.
Hi, my name is Ramon. I spent a career financing corporations, distressed companies, and they have a tool that these kids don't. This young man, film student, he's technically bankrupt. He'll probably never be able to pay that debt off, with all due respect. Donald Trump filed bankruptcy 4 times and still's a billionaire. We have had little solutions tonight, but I think the bankruptcy code needs to be amended to allow these kids, in some instance, to address that.
So let's be clear on that. What does the bankruptcy code say right now about student debt? I'm not clear about it.
That neither federal or private loans are dischargeable in bankruptcy.
Okay. Wow. All right. Let's get one last question or comment. Where's the mic? All right.
Hi, thank you for letting me be the last one. And thank you, panel, for coming out to speak. And by the way, Mr. Wong, I am a master's in philosophy graduate student, so heads up. It's one of the better choices I made, I think.
You've come out of your cave, huh?
Yeah, as in the words of the great Greek philosopher Plato. There seems to be a few different issues surrounding this, and I think all of us across the board, from public to private to liberal arts education, can agree with this. Colleges as a whole survive on a few different things. You have to have students to teach, you have to have faculty to teach them, and then you have to have administrative to kind of do some of the tying up the loose ends. Something that I noticed, though, as a student, as all of us have come together and noticed that students are paying a lot of money to go to school, but at the same time, there's another issue that I'm not sure how many of us know, that a lot of our faculty in most of our educational facilities are adjunct, and every February, there's the complaint that there's gonna be an adjunct walkout day. So if I'm noble, but at the same time naively paying this amount of money to go to these universities and get the degrees that I'm so proud of having, and then the universities have the bravery to rise up the cost across whatever state, I think that while at the same time I have the right to ask the question of if my education is warranted financially, I also have just as much of a right to ask, why is my professor living off of food stamps, off of the same, I'm $80,000 in debt. Why is he living off of food stamps? If this guy's over here taking out $400,000 just to go to school, why are a majority of our faculty adjunct? So maybe that's not something that this panel can ask or answer, but I do think it's a well-warranted question.
It's a very important question, and it's a question that would that another panel should take on. But it is actually very important, and there is some movement on the community colleges. We're reporting on it about the hiring of adjuncts and that sort of thing. But what you raise is the important point of these higher education institutions as you know, not microcosms, but as holistic communities, right? And you know, where does the money go? We've just tapped into a little bit of it, but what I'm very proud of is, you know, all the information we got from all of the panelists and your participation. So I'd like to thank everybody on the panel tonight. I'd like to thank all your participation, and that's it. Thank you, and as we say, we'll see you on the radio.